Hi, this is Steve Bragg, and this is a series of video clips from a recent dive trip to the British Virgin Islands. The videos were taken in April of 2017. We're on a liveaboard dive boat named the Cuan. This is the largest trimaran in the world. It's 104 feet long, 44 feet wide, holds a maximum of 20 divers and a crew of 7. That's the dive deck in the back where they keep all of our rigs. And the stern is where everyone hangs out most of the time and also serve meals out here. Here's a quick look at the activity schedule for the day. You'll notice a lot of dives listed. We typically did between 2 and 3 dives per day, sometimes 4. Quick look below decks. You can see someone coming up the stairs and back. At the lower level is the galley, where someone slaves away pretty much the entire day to feed us. All around this room are doors leading off to the various bedrooms, and in the back there is a wet bar, fully stocked, of course. Now, let's get underwater, and we'll look at 2 wreck dives in particular. The first one is the RMS Rhone, which sank in 1867 and broke apart with the lower half at about 80 feet of water and the upper half at about 40 feet. The part you see here is at about 40 feet. Now, keep in mind it's been underwater for 150 years, so there's a great deal of coral growth all over it. So this is a beautiful, beautiful dive. Also, because it's only at 40 feet, there's a lot of sunlight and a great deal to see. This is the most popular dive in the British Virgin Islands, which is also a problem since there's almost always someone down there. We pretty routinely saw 4, 5, 6 dive boats anchored over the site. Now, that's the shallow part. That's the easy part. The lower section, as I mentioned, is at 80 feet or thereabouts, and it features a swim-through. Now, this is an overhead environment, which means that once you go inside, you cannot go straight up in order to exit. You have to either turn around and go back out or swim through to the far end. And this is about a 90-foot swim through. So at a depth of 80 feet, you actually have to go at least, at a maximum of 90 feet to get through it, and then back up 80 more feet to get to the surface. So it's a fairly extended overhead environment. So you really don't want to have any issues down here. Now, the Rhone was primarily made of metal. The wood's long since rotted away, so what you see here are metal support struts. These will eventually rot out. The swim-through will eventually collapse, but at this point it still seems fairly robust. Also, since this is quite popular, the local dive groups have gone through and taken out any obstructions that might catch on your dive equipment. So it's relatively safe, but if you're going to try hard, you could probably get stuck in here. Now, this is what it looks like during the day. Notice it's still pretty dark. And also there are an awful lot of particulates in the water. You'll see a few spots on the camera lens, and that gets worse depending upon where you're looking and where you go, and also depending upon how the current is flowing through the wreck. Now, we're going to come back a few hours later at about 7 o'clock at night and do a night dive in the exact same swim-through. And it can be fun to compare what this looks like during the day, when it's fairly benign, and what it looks like at night, when it isn't entirely so benign. So here we go. It's nighttime now. We are swimming along in 80 feet of water in an overhead environment at night, which is considered a moderately risky sort of dive. Also, there are 13 divers in the water, which for this kind of a dive is probably about twice as many as there really should be, since it introduces a couple of risks. One of which is that over time, people will, through their finning action, kick up more and more of the particulates, so it gets denser to look at and just soupy. And you'll see more spots on the camera lens as this image goes along. In addition to that, there's a greater risk that someone could catch on an obstruction or just generally freak out. Now there's the particulates in the water you can see right there. You may have noticed something about the lights. Some of the lights are red lights. Melissa and I both use those, and others use regular white dive lights. The red ones are mostly used because it bothers the fish less and also because they're really cool. So we prefer to use red lights. When someone is using any type of colored light, if they see something they think is interesting, they'll flick the light around rapidly to draw your attention to it, or because they're simply being annoying. In a couple spots here, you'll see, like right there, where someone's doing it, probably a small fish of some sort down there. As we go through, you'll notice it's really pitch black. So the group tends to stay together a bit so you can see the person's light in front of you in order to get all the way through without any incidents. And one thing you might also notice is that when it's dark like this, things look a lot closer. So it's not as spacious. It seems as though you're jammed in, and it's easier to get claustrophobic. Not trying to overrate the danger of this, it isn't really that bad, but just pointing out that night dives are an entirely different creature from day dives. Now we're going to switch over to an entirely different type of wreck. A couple of weeks before we got there, the Kodiak Queen was intentionally sunk. This was purchased, stripped down, and sunk in a dive area. There's something very unusual about this. You'll notice all kinds of things festooning the top. Almost looks like a couple of dragons are mating on the superstructure. What's going on here is this spent a number of months in dry dock where a team of welders put together a whole bunch of these wire mesh constructions, and the intent is not to puzzle people, though it certainly will do that, but mainly so that over a period of years, coral, we hope, will grow on it. And eventually this could become quite an attraction for divers. Now, as you'll see here, it really looks strange. I could see a future Alien movie being filmed in this. But it's really not too bad, and it's designed for swim-throughs. So, in fact, let's do a swim-through. So, these are very wide gaps into the system, probably 5 or 6 feet wide. And you can see one of the other divers, Linda, coming towards us, diving very well, in fact. Excellent buoyancy. And you can slide right on through. It's possible that stream of bubbles coming up is from the original sinking and air is still finding its way out of the wreck, but more likely somebody's just down below and their bubbles are coming up through holes in the decking. At any rate, this would be interesting to come back in 5 or maybe 10 years and see what kind of coral growth is built up on all this wire mesh. And that concludes our review of a couple of dives in the British Virgin Islands.